I don't know where it was first said, but you'll understand, you'll recognize this statement. Misery loves company. I got prepared for this sermon very well. Friday night when I umpired 3 ball games and umpired 5 yesterday, misery loves company. If you ever want to know just how miserable life can be an umpire. Right, Clint? You can make everybody mad quick. Real quick. Job had just made his friends mad. I mean, he just made them mad. He was holding on to his innocence through all of this. And they were accusing him of, man, what? I mean, to incur all of this wrath of God? Why, Job, you must have done some of the most unhumane things known to man. And he keeps saying, guys, I'm innocent. I don't know why this is all transpiring. I understand that God can do as He wishes, as He always can. And God can do as He pleases, but this makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And I also learned this week, I've always wondered what occupation Job's 3 friends had. I can tell you now what they did for a living. They were preachers. Yeah, they were preachers. You know how I know that? Look in chapter 16 and verse 3. Shall their windy words ever come to an end? They were preachers. Job says, guys, you ain't helping me at all. You are not... You are only adding to the misery that I'm already experiencing. In verse 2 he says, miserable comforters you are. I thought you came to help me. I thought you came to help me bear this burden. I thought you came to share this sorrow. But in reality, all you've done is magnified it. Miserable comforters. Anything but comforters you are. Perhaps the only blessing in this is those 7 days they sat with him and said nothing. Just being there with him. But the moment they began to open their mouths, they began to make accusations that were not founded on any evidence other than a false belief that God was punishing Job for some sin that he had committed. And finally, as Job replies over and over again, he finally just comes out and says, guys, you're just miserable. You are just pathetic. You are not helping this situation at all. There's always one, right? And every team's got one. It's a fact. And they're the person that stirs the pot the entire time, right? As an umpire, you learn them real quick. You learn their voice, you learn what they look like, and you hear them the entire time. And they just fuel the animosity. They just fuel the bickering. They just fuel... Job's friends has come in here and they're just those people that instead of being the peacemakers, instead of calming this, instead of trying to help the situation, even though they don't understand it, and fair enough, they don't have a full understanding. You and I, we have a perspective they don't have. But even in their lack of understanding, instead of being a blessing to Job, they have actually become a hindrance, if you will. And so as you set up this reply in verse 16, and he says to him in verse 3, guys, you're just a bunch of windbags. I don't know any other way to interpret verse 3. You just talk, and when's it ever going to end? And it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't add up, and it doesn't help, and you just keep on and on and on and on. He says, you know, if I was in your shoes, I'd probably be doing the same thing. Verse 4, he says, I could speak as you do if I was in your... Guys, I get it. I get it. I understand it. That you're in a perspective where you haven't been with me and you don't know my life. And so you've come in here from afar and now you're trying to provide some help and it's not any help. And if the roles were reversed, Job says, I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be right where you are. The words you're saying, I would be saying. Because that's the only way that we have understood it. But I'm still holding to my innocence. I haven't done anything. Verse 5. I don't know if he says this sarcastically or if he really means what he says here. Why don't I just join you? You know, I guess being reared as a boy and kind of being inbred as a smart aleck, I'm looking at it as a kind of a sarcastic kind of way. You know? It's just like, you're not doing any good. If I was on your side, I'd be doing the same thing. So why don't I just join you, know? Let me just walk out in the stands and sit down out there with you. Let's just all holler at the umpire together. Wouldn't that be fun, you know? This is all do it together. I don't know that that's what he's saying in verse 5, but that's kind of what I see. Guys, if I could just join you and with my mouth, you know, we'll just make this. But I realize in verse 6, whether I speak or whether I don't speak, the pain's still real. I can say whatever I want to say, or I can forbear, that is, I can remain silent or refuse to speak, and either way, it doesn't change the fact that I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with. And it's misery. And it's as though misery has invited more misery from these three friends. God's warned me out. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like God has just torn me down? Devastated. Broken me in every... I am just so heavy. I am so loaded that with the next step, everything may just crumble and shatter to pieces. God has got that much on me. God has just worn me out. He's made desolate of all my company. He's shriveled me up. Literally dried up my life. He's taken the sap right out of me. And because of that, my body is just wilting away. These trials, this testing, all of this loss, all of this pain, all of this sorrow, only to send me, you three guys who are worth nothing. And it's just slap after slap after slap, and I'm just getting tired, and I'm just worn out. That's the setup of this reply. That's the circumstances revolving. Let me tell you how God's attacked me, verse 9. He's torn me to pieces like a wild beast would tear apart its meal. God has just come in like a wild animal and just ripped my life to shreds. Verse 9. You want to talk about a gruesome attack? You want to talk about the graphics behind gnashing his teeth, sharpening his eyes? He's just cut me through with his eyes and ripped me apart with his teeth. He's just torn me to pieces. Verse 10, he's caused me to look at and reflect. And as I look out, watch this, men are just, they're just gapping at me with their mouth. They're just making an insult at me. They're just making fun of me. It's just awful to even live. God's not only attacked me and torn me apart like a wild beast, but now He's making me walk around, and as people look at me and reflect and laugh at me and scorn. It's not just that, but verse 12, He's wrestled me like a wrestler. He's dashed me to pieces. Like an archer, He set me up as His target, verse 12. And His arches surround me. God's attacked me like a wild animal. Job's just describing the attack that he feels here. I don't think for a moment that he's accusing, that he's ridiculing, that he's disgracing or dishonoring God in any way. He's just, he says, okay, here's the circumstances surrounding where we are. Now let me tell you what's happened. Here's the attack that I feel. And it's like the attack of a wild animal. It's the embarrassment of making me a pitiful person in front of all these other people who look at me and just scorn. It's like a wrestler who would take someone and body slam them. Job says, man, I feel like I've been grabbed by the neck and jerked backwards and just body slammed. I feel like God had His bow and arrow, and I was the target. And His arrow was pointing right at me. I was the bullseye. Verse 14. He runs upon me like a warrior, a stampede, a charge. Job says, I was just standing there, and it's just like from out of nowhere, boom. Like a mighty man of war, God came at me. The attack is vicious. It's real. It's gut-wrenching. But the conclusion, oh man, the conclusion of this chapter is so sobering. Look at verse 19. Even now. Even now. Even now what? Well, even the fact that you three windbags have been here all this time. And even the fact that you've only made a miserable situation more miserable. And even the fact that I am worn slap out. And I am just drying up and withering away. And even the fact that I have been attacked on all sides and torn apart and ripped to pieces and shreds and shot at by arrows, at least figuratively speaking, and attacked by a warrior, figuratively speaking. Even now, my witness is in heaven. Even now, He who testifies for me is on high. Now, I'm not here to make a debate or a discussion on witnessing or testifying. I realize there's some people in the religious world today who do those things. Let me tell you something. They're Bible terms. Don't miss them. Right there they are, Job 16 and verse 19. I want you to notice who Job says is doing the witnessing for him. Not him. God. I want you to notice who Job says is testifying for him. God. He says, God is my witness. God testifies. He's on high. He's in heaven. As miserable as you guys are, God is the great God of all comfort. Did you hear 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 7? Man, I love that passage. Nate read it so well. God is the God of all comfort. Go back and read that. You're living in a miserable situation right now. Read 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 7. Man, it'll get you through some tough days. God is the God of all comfort. God is the one who supplies comfort. God is the one who enables you and I to suffer in life and to be a comfort to others. We are comforted by God that we might comfort others. 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 7. And though we go through suffering, and though we go through trials, when we recognize the comfort from God, and though others go through trials, and though others suffer, and when they recognize God's comfort through us, God is glorified. Wow. The God of all comfort. Even now, Job says, I have a witness in heaven, one who testifies is sitting on high. I've got God. Though my friends, verse 20, what friends, right? Though my friends scorn me, though my eyes pour out tears, could I go to God as a neighbor, as a man? Could I argue my case? Would God let me talk to Him like a neighbor? Years have come and I go away and I will not return. I'm looking for help. Let me tell you where I'll find help. I'll find help in God. Nobody else will take my case. God will take my case. Would God take my case? Would God defend me in court? Would God stand for me and present my portfolio to the courtroom? Could I talk to God as a man, as my neighbor, as one who is a close friend, acquaintance? God is my witness. God testifies for me. In James chapter 5. In James chapter 5, James makes just a brief reference to this guy by the name of Job. He says in James 5 and verse 10, as an example of suffering and patience, brethren, take the prophet who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, verse 11 of James 5, consider those blessed who remain steadfast. Have you ever heard of the steadfastness of Job? I would suggest to you this morning that perhaps Job is in one of his deepest valleys in chapter 16. And yet he is unwavering. He is steadfast, James says. And you have seen the purpose of the Lord and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Isn't it great to see the end of the story of the book of Job? When we get back up on that spiritual mountain, that spiritual peak. But I'm telling you, in chapter 16, it is misery loves company. It is valley. Maybe one of the deepest valleys of the book. And Job just calls it like it is. And he admits the reality. And when he sums up, he says, even now, don't miss Job 16 and verse 19. Even now, I have one who witnesses and testifies for me. I love the passage found in 1 John. It's in chapter 2. And it's in verse 2. For Jesus is the propitiation for our sins. He is our advocate, and not for ours only, but for all the sins of the world. Man, I love 1 John 2 and verse 2. Why? Because I have a propitiation. Why? Because I have an advocate. Why? Because I have a mediator for all of my sins. But not just me. You see, we got a real problem here, folks. It's very simple. It goes something like this. For we have an adversary. For we have an adversary. He's called the devil. And he seeks about as a roaring lion, looking for someone to tear apart, gnashing teeth, sharpened eyes, and just to rip you to shreds. He's looking for someone to go to court with, to be able to accuse and to condemn and to devastate into an eternal hell. That's our problem. It's real simple. The solution? You need a witness. You need one to testify for you. I do too. We need an advocate. We need a propitiation. We need a mediator. In all of my learning of 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, in that passage where the devil is a roaring lion, verse 9 says, resist him. You can. So can I. We can resist him and stand firm in our faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by others throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, verse 10, don't miss 1 Peter 5 and verse 10. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you into eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. Folks, it's a crummy parallel, but it's the best one I've got. I've spent a multiple of hours this weekend out under the hot, glaring sun, oftentimes with a lot of equipment on from head to toe. It's brutal. Spent a lot of time getting hollered at from both sides of the fence. You know why they put fences around ball fields? Keep spectators and umpires separated. Come off the field. Come off the field every game to a ice-cold frog talk around my neck. About take your breath away. Cool, refreshing, energizing, life-giving. Such a wonderful blessing. It's a terrible parallel, but I'm telling you that you and I are living in the miserable heat of the sun with all of life hollering at us. But the game will end. The final inning will come. The last out will be recorded at some point in your life. And you know what I want? I want you and I to get that cool, refreshing, life-giving, ice-cold frog talk in Jesus Christ. Oh, it's a terrible parallel, but it's the best one I got. I want you and I to open our eyes into eternity, into a place of rest and comfort and peace. We got a problem, folks. But with every problem, God has offered a solution. The solution is in Jesus Christ. We got a problem, folks. We live in a life, we live in a world of burdens. And many, many hearts and many, many minds and many, many lives are heavy with sin and rebellion and the lack of obedience to the Lord. And the best thing I can offer you this morning is from God Himself. It's called Calvary, where burdens are lifted. Would you let God do that for you as we stand and sing?